Today's podcast is brought to you by Audible. Get a free audiobook download and a 30-day free trial at www.audibletrial.com/historyfangirl. Over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Kindle, Android, or MP3 player. Hi, I'm Stephanie Craig. Welcome to the History Fangirl podcast. This is episode 23, The Brooklyn Bridge. The construction of the Brooklyn Bridge changed New York City history forever by connecting Manhattan to Brooklyn, engulfing the once suburb into a major part of the city itself. But why did the city set out to build the bridge in the first place? How did the citizens of the city receive it? And why did P.T. Barnum need to take elephants across to get people to use it? My guest today is Ariel Viera from Urbanist. He's back to chat about the bridge's history, its secrets, and how a band of female river pirates thwarted one of its unrealized projects. My guest today is Ariel Viera from Urbanist. You are our first repeat guest. I'm so excited to talk again. How are you, Ariel?
I'm so happy to be here again and talk more history.
So our first episode that we did together was kind of a special one because it was the first time I'd ever recorded an episode live with somebody and then also broadcast it on their channel live. So there's a video on your Facebook page of us doing our Central Park episode, which is so cool.
It's cool. The pressure's on.
I know.
When it's live.
Why don't you remind people a little bit about who you are and what you do before we dive into today's topic, which is the Brooklyn Bridge.
Yeah, of course. So I explore the world's cities through Facebook Live 360 video and video as well. So I basically take advantage of all Facebook video to tell the unique stories about cities, maybe history, food, or culture. And usually they're all intertwined.
Yeah, you can tell so much about a place from not only like its architecture, but like you can also tell like what ingredients are in its food, what things are in its buildings, tell you a lot about the place that people come from and then how that affects them. So I totally agree.
Yeah, and that's the beauty about exploring cities is that they're just so densely packed with things to learn. That I love that you're doing this podcast. It really helps people have better experiences when traveling.
I hope so. I know that there's some people that listen to podcasts like this and it's really just from a history perspective and they just don't have a lot of time for travel. But I hope that some people end up going to some of these places, especially places like New York City, which a lot of my listeners are probably within a pretty cheap plane ticket to or bus ride to. And when they go there, have new ways to appreciate it, especially because like there's so many stories to tell in a city like New York.
Oh, yes. I've been covering New York City for the past year, and I only basically covered Manhattan and Brooklyn. There's like 3 other boroughs that haven't covered at all.
So before we dive in, just because I'm curious, what are some of the stories that you found about New York that you didn't know existed before you started doing Urbanist?
So many, but the latest one I really encountered is the Players, which is a very exclusive club in Gramercy Park in New York City that was built by the brother who assassinated Abraham Lincoln.
Oh my God.
He actually was a liberal, while his brother, of course, as we know, was a Confederate. And he started this club in order to connect the entertainment industry and the arts industry with the aristocracy of New York City. And so many top actors, writers, and directors have been members of this club for the past 100 years.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. Can people go visit? Like, can they buy a ticket to go visit or do they have to be a member to get in?
So this is one of the huge benefits of being a content creator. No. I ended up getting access. Luckily, I was like the second person ever to film there because they're super strict about filming or taking photos inside because they want to maintain that exclusivity feel. And they even denied many of their members, one of them being Woody Allen, who would repeatedly ask to film there. They would say no every single year. So I was extremely lucky to have the chance. But it's one of those places that might open up in the future. And I think me, by covering it now, allows people to kind of feel like the city is a lot more fuller of stories than just the landmarks that they can see on via the guidebooks.
So we'll put a link in the show notes to your video. I mean, we'll put a link in the show notes to your site anyway, but we'll put a link specifically to the video of the Players Club if people want to see it, especially because it's such a cool exclusive video. Congratulations on getting that. That's amazing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, now it's 2 videos. I just made a 360 video recently.
So let's dive into the Brooklyn Bridge. So most of my memories of the Brooklyn Bridge when I'm in New York, right, are when I'm sober and I'm being responsible, I'm taking the subway because my best friend lives in Brooklyn. I should say, for my other best friend who lives in North Carolina, one of my best friends lives in Brooklyn, or this other girl will kill me. But so when I get to New York and I'm like being responsible, I take the subway, I don't see the Brooklyn Bridge. But normally, the way that I see the Brooklyn Bridge is I've been out with my friends in New York, had a little too much to drink, need to get back to her apartment. And so it's this like beautiful taxi ride across the Brooklyn Bridge when I've had just a little bit too much to drink. And just everything about New York feels magical in that moment. So it's one of my favorite places. And I really hate to say that I've never looked into the history of it because I have always viewed it more as a transportation method than a landmark. So I'm so excited to talk about it with you. Well, how did you first become interested in the Brooklyn Bridge?
I first became interested in the Brooklyn Bridge when I realized I was a lifelong New Yorker, and at 21 years old, I never, ever walked across the bridge. And I decided one night to walk across the bridge with friends, and I realized this bridge is very old. I didn't know the exact date at that time, and there has to be some very interesting history behind it. So many years after that, I realized has to be one of the very first videos I ended up making on Facebook Live as a walking tour, and so I did.
That's amazing. And so we'll also link to, because I was going through your videos and I noticed, we'll link to your walking video, your walk across the Brooklyn Bridge too in the show notes. So let's get started with the actual history of it. So what were the beginnings of the Brooklyn Bridge and how did people get from Brooklyn to Manhattan before?
Okay, so before there ever was the Brooklyn Bridge, people only got to Manhattan and Brooklyn via ferry. They used to be 2 separate cities, not connected at the time. It was the city of Brooklyn and the city of New York, which is modern-day Manhattan.
And when did people decide to start a bridge project?
Well, the thing is, at that time, if you were to look at New York City today, the East River would look very nice and serene, maybe 2 or 3 ships passing by. But back then, in the mid-1800s, there were hundreds of ships and ports and docks and dry docks all around the harbor and the East River. So it was a very densely packed river. So much so that there would be a lot of traffic to just get to and from Brooklyn and New York. And this was just at the very beginning where New York City, which is modern-day Manhattan, had its very first suburb in Brooklyn Heights, which is just across the water from downtown Manhattan. And there were a few ferries where you can take it directly from street to street, such as the Grand Street Ferry, where you go from Grand Street, Williamsburg, to Grand Street in the Lower East Side. Many other ferries all across downtown Manhattan. But that ended up being very cumbersome, especially for Brooklyn. Brooklyn really wanted to draw more people in, not just to Brooklyn Heights, but to many other areas of Brooklyn. And they put forward this plan to build a bridge.
Now, how did they decide to select the architect?
It was interesting because this bridge, the East River is huge. It's a little bit longer than the Thames in London, which already had a few bridges across it. So they had to build something that was completely revolutionary and could span the entire length of the East River without impeding boat and ship traffic. They end up going to a guy who, his name is John Roebling, who revolutionized wires. He ended up making a wire that was a lot stronger than was used in many bridges across the U.S., which is usually made out of hemp. He ended up making a very strong steel wire. And he was also an architect, and he proposed to to build the bridge across the East River.
Now, was there anything special artistically about his design? Because it's both like a pretty standard bridge, but also it's an iconic bridge. And I feel like it's one of those bridges that other bridges have been modeled after.
It's amazing. I like how you say it's a standard bridge, but it's an iconic bridge. Because when it actually first came out, the bridge, many critics, especially architectural critics, said that the bridge was super plain. And that was completely done on purpose. Because, okay, New York City at that time, the highest building in all of New York City and Brooklyn was Trinity Church in downtown Manhattan. Trinity Church is one of the most richest churches in basically the entire world, probably after the Vatican. And
it's also, just for astute listeners who've been reading my blog for a while, it's where Alexander Hamilton was buried.
Yes, exactly.
And I have an article on my website that we'll link to it with some pictures of some hilarious Hamilton fangirls at his grave.
So if you want to see Hamilton for free, just go to the graveyard in Trinity Church.
Exactly.
But okay, so at that time, it is blasphemous to build something taller than the church, because how dare a human aspire to go higher than the Holy Church itself? And that's why in many cities like London and Paris, you also had many of the cathedrals and holy buildings a lot taller than the other municipal or landmark structures that were built there. In order to work a way around that, John Roebling decided to... The bridge had to be very tall because it had to go across the East River and allow traffic for boats to pass through. But at the same time, he didn't want to piss off the church. So he decided to build it like if it was a church.
Oh.
He went for that Gothic architectural style that was very iconic, especially in England. And it was very similar to the architectural style of Trinity Church itself. Once he did that style, the church really didn't complain too much. But there ended up being more controversy around that, but we'll get to that later.
Okay. Now, what was the actual building process like?
So the building process... John Roebling, this guy, he is an immigrant from Germany, ended up making a kick-ass new wire system, already starting to build the bridge. But just as the bridge started construction in 1869, he died.
Oh.
Yeah. He was crossing the ferry from Manhattan to Brooklyn when cargo flipped over and hit him right on the leg, and they had to amputate his toes.
He died from complications with his surgery?
Yes, exactly. And it's kind of ironic because he was building a bridge to not use the ferry, and he died using the ferry. It's one of the weird ironies of history.
Well, it's just exactly why he needed a bridge. He was...
Exactly. But luckily, his son, who was 31 years old at the time and a very well-established soldier during the Civil War, was also studying architecture and engineering, and he ended up taking over the project.
Did he go on to do any other projects after?
No, I don't think so. The Brooklyn Bridge took many years to build, from 1869 all the way to 1883. So for Washington Roebling, the son of John Roebling, that was a lifelong project. But also, tragedy kind of followed this family through, sadly, with Washington Roebling as well. Now, the Brooklyn Bridge is an engineering marvel at the time, because in order to get these huge towers that were 200 feet tall and have them in the water and strong enough to sustain all the traffic that was passing through, they had to make a new system called the Caisson System. And the Caisson System is this, basically they built the base of the towers and slowly but surely sunk them to the riverbed and then dug into the riverbed and solidified them.
How was this different than other bridges?
How was it different from other bridges?
Yeah, like what was the advancement?
I would assume it was the main difference was that they weren't built on such deep water as the East River.
Oh, okay.
Um, and from what I know from the bridges made in the Thames in London, they were built in very tiny little distances where the Thames separated the two pieces of land. So you basically could build the bridge on one end on land and the other end on land without too much issue.
Okay. Now, aside from John Roebling passing away, were there any other incidents during the building process?
Yeah, so the caissons, they had to build them deeper and deeper into the riverbed. The thing is, the East River is very deep, and that deepness caused pressure sickness among many of its construction workers.
Oh, wow.
So as they were building deeper and deeper and deeper, many of the construction workers started experiencing paralysis, sometimes psychosis, because it will also affect your brain, and just overall exhaustion and tiredness. Washington Roebling was one of those people. He ended up getting paralysis from going into the caissons.
Oh, wow.
Overseeing the project. So he was bedridden, and apparently, according to basically legend at this point, he lived on the Brooklyn Heights, and apparently he used binoculars on a daily basis to oversee the Brooklyn Bridge from his house.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah. But the cool thing is, when that happened, his wife, Emily Roebling, who was a very talented, basically manager, ended up taking over the construction project and seeing it through its final year.
What do we know about her?
We don't know too much about her, but we just know that she was a very kick-ass construction manager.
That's amazing.
So much so that a woman in the late 1800s managed to oversee the largest construction project in American history at that point, which is a very impressive feat. So much so that her name is still recognized on one of the plaques of the Brooklyn Bridge. And she was also ceremoniously the first person to cross the bridge.
Do we have pictures that survive of her crossing the bridge?
No, I'm not entirely sure. Most likely.
I'm going to have to find, if I find some, I'll put it in the blog post for this episode. I don't know if I'll find some, but I'm going to look.
I think you will, because there's a lot of footage of the Brooklyn Bridge. There's both video and photo of its original opening.
That's amazing. So after the bridge opens, we know kind of how the church reacts. How does everyone else react to?
Oh, everyone. So, okay. To put into context.
oh boy, giddy up.
Okay, this is quite a story. Okay, to put into context, the Brooklyn Bridge at that time, no one's seen something that huge and magnificent before. This was taller than any other building in New York City. This was longer than any other bridge in the world. People were both amazed and also terrified because will this fall down? Will this tumble under very strong gusts of wind? So about a week after the bridge was officially open, many people were crossing it, and a woman saw these massive gusts of wind and started panicking and screamed that the bridge was falling down. And the bridge at that time was packed with tourists because it captured basically the national imagination. And through that panic ensued through the bridge, and people started rushing out of the bridge. So much so that a stampede ensued and 12 people died trying to get out of the bridge, even though the bridge was completely fine.
Oh my gosh.
However, after that incident, people were very deeply terrified to cross it. Traffic went way down. So one of the greatest showmen, basically, in American history, P.T. Barnum, came to the rescue.
Oh, yeah? Okay. Interesting.
And actually, there's a movie right now about P.T. Barnum starring Hugh Jackman called The Greatest Showman. Yeah. But P.T. Barnum was basically the guy who invented the circus here in the U.S., the huge extravagant circus that usually has a very iconic animal, the elephant. And he was basically the first one to start that. So he took 21 elephants as a show and crossed them across the Brooklyn Bridge to show everyone, hey, if these 1-ton elephants could cross the bridge, it is safe for everyone else to do so too. And after that, people felt a lot more calmer about crossing.
Oh, that's awesome. That would have been an interesting sight to see too.
Oh, hell yeah. I wish they would do it again.
Yeah.
Just like ceremoniously cross more elephants.
In 1959, there was a expedition that was I think Cambridge, Oxford or Cambridge, but what there was I don't know what his technical job was because at this point he had just gotten out of university, but he was really interested in Hannibal, and he wrote and asked all these zoos if he could take an elephant across the Alps to prove that Hannibal could have done it, and one of the zoos said yes, and so this like just graduated college student took an elephant named Jumbo across the Alps. I think we could totally get elephants across the Brooklyn Bridge again.
So that's funny that you mentioned that his name is Jumbo because P.T. Barnum's main elephant was named Jumbo. That was the name of the attraction. I assume that they named that elephant that crossed the Alps after P.T. Barnum's elephant.
I would imagine so because this elephant got famous only when they did that, but I think she was like 12 when I'm kind of obsessed with this story of these people that crossed the Alps with this elephant. So the elephant, I believe, was 12, and I know that because I've listened to the story way too many times.
Awesome.
But that was in the late 50s. So, and unfortunately, the elephant passed away, but the guy that did it is still around, and it was just one of those cool things that people did that I don't know if you could do today.
Well, in the name of Hannibal, P.T. Barnum, and Jumbo, I think it's time to do it again.
Absolutely. So after P.T. Barnum helps and people are excited to use the bridge again, or at least don't think it's going to fall, how does it go from something that people are terrified of and having panic attacks on to like this mainstay of New York life?
Ooh, okay. This gets into very interesting history about downtown Manhattan because downtown Manhattan at that time was the most densely area in the entire world. Lower East Side, where most of the immigrants moved to at that time was mostly Eastern European Jewish immigrants and Irish immigrants, were packed to the brim. Like you would walk through Lower East Side in the middle of a Saturday day and it would be like going to a packed nightclub at night here in New York City. It would be that many people on the street. You can see photos of it if you give it a quick search, where you would see there is no room to walk in the Lower East Side. So Manhattan had a very bad overcrowding problem, and it was opportunity for Brooklyn, and this is why Brooklyn so heavily funded the project, because they knew that people would be incentivized to move to Brooklyn in order to alleviate crowding that was happening all around Manhattan.
When do people start moving to Brooklyn because of the bridge?
Oh, immediately. Just right when the bridge started happening, many of the Jewish immigrants in the Lower East Side started immigrating into Brooklyn, starting with the area in downtown Brooklyn where it was starting to rise up as a big center for work and offices. But then people started moving deeper into Brooklyn. I think specifically, so the cool thing is you can really trace the progression of many immigrants through the bridges. So with Brooklyn Bridge, you can trace the progression of Jewish immigrants through Brooklyn, because all you do is follow the road from Brooklyn Bridge into Brooklyn, which leads into Crown Heights and Prospect Heights, where there's still many Jewish immigrants today inside there.
Now, what are some other important stories about the bridge after it opened that we should know?
I actually want to talk a little bit about the guy who's tried to think he could jump from the bridge and survive.
Oh, do it. Go for it, man.
There was a good guy his name was Robert Emmet Oldham. And this guy, in 1885, 2 years after the bridge opened, he was a swimming instructor. And he really believed, just like P.T. Barnum wanted to show off to everyone that the bridge was awesome and safe, he wanted to assure everyone that the bridge wasn't that high.
And he wanted to do this by himself?
and he wanted to do this by himself. He already prepared for a boat. His fellow students to be in a boat at the East River, waiting for him once he jumps off and dives into the East River. So he jumped off the East River, dived into it, but unfortunately, it was very high, and he got crushed by the East River. He actually ended up surviving for a few minutes afterwards, so he technically did survive the fall, but he died due to complications also from jumping off.
Oh my gosh. Have there been any other famous jumpers or people using the bridge for stunts?
Actually, I have no. I think that was basically it. No, another cool thing is when the bridge was being built, the wires that you see on the bridge right now, they were built before the actual base of the bridge. So before there was foot traffic or carriage traffic, people would go as a tourist attraction on the wires from the New York Tower to the Brooklyn Tower.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, which imagine doing that today. Like, I can imagine it's very terrifying because all you would see is water beneath you on this tiny little thin wire. And people have gone up on the bridge today. For example, about like a few years ago, a man from Shanghai snuck into the wiring of the bridge, climbed all the way to the top of, I think it was the Brooklyn Tower, and took a selfie. And the thing is, immediately when he posted a selfie on social media, the authorities knew about it and they escorted him off the bridge and deported him back to China.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
You know how some bridges have like secret apartments or hidden rooms? Is there anything interesting or unique about the actual structure?
Oh yeah. So originally the Manhattan Bridge, the Manhattan portion of the bridge was meant to be an indoor market. So the archways that you see in the Manhattan side, they're actually hollow inside, and there are these massive rooms where they intended it to be indoor markets. That never ended up happening because that area of Manhattan was very seedy at the time. Right next door was the worst neighborhood in all of New York City, which was called the Third Ward. So much so that you had river pirates, which were actual pirates in the river, and they were roving gangs in that area that would just basically cheat people out of their money and mug them and stuff like that. So it wasn't a very conducive place to try something new with the indoor market. But what ended up happening was, I think one wine cellar in New York City ended up renting out the space and it has stored wine inside those archways on the Manhattan side of the bridge.
Oh wow, that's amazing. And I have never heard of river pirates before, and now I that is a terrifying thought.
Oh my god, they were so crazy because there was one river pirate that was mostly composed of women, and the women would shave their teeth to make it look like vampire teeth,
What?
or more so like crocodile teeth.
No.
Yes.
What?
Yep.
So there's a band of roaming female river pirates that shave their teeth to look like crocodile vampires.
Yep.
That is that
Yep.
is
Exactly.
nuts. That is so nuts.
So imagine. Oh, let's go to the indoor market and
Oh,
run into these river pirates.
oh my gosh. Oh, I first of all, just the idea of shaving your teeth is just horrifying to me. Like I can my teeth physically hurt right now just thinking about it.
Yeah. Well, actually, along with that, in order to illustrate how bad the neighborhood was, the word hooker comes from a neighborhood also nearby the Brooklyn Bridge called Cornelius Hook, which was also a very seedy area, which was known for its prostitution, and hence people end up calling them hookers after that.
Oh wow. So before we move on from the bridge, is there anything else that listeners should know about the history of Brooklyn Bridge?
I think the most cool thing about the bridge is just like walking on it. I think you could really like step on what made New York City great, because if it weren't for the Brooklyn Bridge, we would still have two separate cities. Brooklyn and Manhattan.
Oh, wow.
And because of that bridge, we end up exploding in popularity and size, and end up becoming one of the greatest cities in the entire world.
Well, according to Hamilton, it's the greatest city in the world, which is the ultimate authority in my book.
And it's funny because Hamilton was only referring to Manhattan at that time.
Oh, yeah, true.
Yeah, he didn't care about Brooklyn.
Well, I don't think I cared about Brooklyn until I saw Newsies when I was 11, and then I cared about it a lot.
Oh, really? Okay.
I love that movie
It
so much.
takes place in Brooklyn?
Yeah, like I it's been a really long time since I've watched it, but it either takes place in Brooklyn or some of the characters are from Brooklyn, but it's very much like a part of that movie, like Brooklyn at the turn of the century during like the newspaper wars. I highly recommend Newsies for anyone who wants to see a very young Christian Bale sing.
But yeah, I think like walking across the Brooklyn Bridge is just a magical experience because you get to experience the city in such a different way. And I would highly recommend people to go from the Brooklyn side to the Manhattan side because you get closer and closer to the skyline. And also going on sunset is great because you get to see the sun setting right behind the Statue of Liberty.
Oh, cool. Oh.
And I've walked the Brooklyn Bridge many times, and another favorite experience of mine walking the bridge was when it was pouring rain. And walking across the bridge in pouring rain, especially at night, it makes you feel like you're in Gotham City, as depicted in the Batman cartoons, because it feels so dark. The city's covered in fog, and you're just in this bridge with a bunch of cars whizzing by. It's just so epic. Also, the bridge is very empty when it rains.
Oh, and yeah, that would make sense. So maybe you get to feel alone in New York City.
Yeah.
So you are actually spending January in London. What are some of the places that you, this New York City guy, is excited about exploring when you get to London? Like, what are the things you are the most just dying to see?
London was the city to go to before New York City was. Many of the things that happened in London directly inspired New York City, and kind of New York City one up them. So I'm very excited for example, to cover the London Bridge, which basically was a precursor to the Brooklyn Bridge. Also Hyde Park, which was also a precursor to Central Park. And then many other places like the British Museum, Trafalgar Square, all the other cool other neighborhoods, and also lots of fish and chips and beer.
Oh yeah, obviously must do those.
Exactly.
You should check out Banqueting House. We did an episode on Banqueting House, and there's like this epic Peter Paul Rubens ceiling in there that you should definitely see while you're there.
Oh, cool. Okay, I'll check it out.
So where can listeners find you across all of the various platforms, and what should they look for?
Yeah, search Urbanist Live on Facebook, so facebook.com/Urbanist Live. And you can find me on Instagram and Twitter at Urbanist Live.
Awesome. Well, listeners, you should definitely go follow him, and especially to see all of his cool London adventures, and then go back and watch some of his live recordings. Ariel, you do some of the coolest stuff with Facebook Live that is out there right now, and it has inspired me to do more live stuff. So I've been trying to do more live on my Facebook page just because I think what you do is so cool, and I want to bring that to my audience too. So everyone go check out Urbanist, and if you're in New York, walk across the Brooklyn Bridge.
Awesome. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thanks for coming back. I'm sure we'll talk again. I want to say thank you again to Ariel for coming back on the show. Definitely check out what he's doing over at Urbanist. It's some of the coolest history/travel stuff that's being done right now. And if for some reason you missed his first episode with us, check out episode 14 on Central Park. A little bit of housekeeping. I'm recording this episode from my hotel room in Thailand, so apologies if there are some sound issues. If you're interested in seeing pictures from my visit to Bangkok or the ancient Thai capital of Ayutthaya, which I'm sure I pronounced incorrectly, come find me on Instagram or Facebook. I'm History Fangirl on both. And one of the things that knowing and working with Ariel has really made me excited to do is more Facebook Live. So my goal is to show some of the temples here in Thailand over the next few days live on Facebook. So definitely check those out. As always, you can find a link to my Patreon page in the show notes. If you're interested in becoming a patron, check it out. I haven't sent the postcards and magnets yet for January, so if you want to join those levels and you want, I don't know which Asian country I'm going to send them from because I'm going to be in a few, but I'm definitely going to be sending them from somewhere cool. And I want to thank you so much for listening.